This was meant to have a cutting edge. Well, two cutting edges. It was meant to be sharp. It was meant to be overall keen. The two major things to look for in a good blade for our purposes, as, you know, well, for its purpose as a commando dagger, is, according to Fairbairn, according to Major William Ewart Fairbairn himself, in his own words, is balance and keenness. He just says balance and keenness are the two main things to look for. And for this particular tool's, well, weapons purposes, balance means right about there, where it is. In the hilt, making it easy to aim. And keenness, overall keenness, meaning sharp. It has to be sharp, and not just in the tip. Because I've had this thing for a while. It was just a kind of impulse purchase, because it looked historically accurate, given how it looked on eBay. So I just picked it up for $10. And the more I look at it, and the more I read about the actual historical thing, and yeah, I know there were some different versions, but there's continuity in the design. I'm beginning to feel okay with a cheap purchase. First of all, I'm probably never going to use it, knock on wood. But also, the more I read about it, the more I realize a lot of the stuff that I see like on online forums, not that I regularly visit any of those, specifically because of the misinformation that you get from so-called experts who are really just highly popular people on the forums. There's a misconception that like there's no point to sharpening the edges, or that like it might even like be bad for the blade, or like something ridiculous like that. Look, beyond overall keenness, Fairbairn himself in this Get Tough, How to Win in Hand-to-Hand Combat, which is like, I don't mean to sound silly when I'm reading the name, but it's awesome. But it's a training manual. I would say a brass tacks, bare, stripped down, very brief introduction to how to use this. But certainly, the most important targets, the soft spots that you would aim for with this thing, there's 6 of them. He boils it down to 6 of them, and out of two out of those 6 are slashes. You can't do anything to those targets with the point, really. You have to slash. But beyond that, he says that it's really important for, even in those other attacks into arteries and things, to cut cleanly out through the artery. That's logical. You'd want to cut out cleanly, not sloppily, not bloodily, not messily, and not risk not even cutting the artery because you've got one dull like mine. Obviously, it's got to be able to cut and thrust, or really stab and slice. I'm not going to go over what those 6 sweet spots are, because I'm not wanting to teach anybody how to murder anybody, because we don't live in those dark times. As one of the people that I saw, some British guy that reviewed this on YouTube, it's an item from darker times. Yeah, buddy, you said that. You got that right, because this ain't also for betoning through logs and carving spoons, like, something like maybe this. If people think that these 2 items are completely just murder weapons, or if some people think that both of these are potential survival weapons in like the wilderness, well, you're wrong. There's a big gap between the two. Okay? This one clearly is useless as a weapon, more or less, in a military context, whereas this one is designed to be a weapon in a military context and not a tool. There's a lot of historical, accounts of these breaking off right there, where the ricasso meets the quillion. And then some of these supposed experts on the knife forums and things will be like, well, those were inferior. Well, those were like inferior ones from America or something. I don't know what the accent of these posters are, but I'm pretty sure they weren't American when they said it was only the American Fairbairn and Sykes daggers that broke off there. It's a design flaw. You can see this thing where the blade ends and the tang begins is narrower by like half. I've taken a magnet to this cheapie, and I know that the tang goes all the way down to there. So I'm happy with that. Because I don't care what kind of super spring steel, whatever you think that the proper Fairbairn Sykes daggers were made from. That's a design flaw. It will break. If you start chucking this thing at trees and carving spoons with it and doing your whittling, it'll break. It's not meant for that. It's meant to go through soft tissue. That's why I might get some use out of this tomorrow when I make my New Year's Eve roast, because I'm going to sharpen it up and use it to perforate the roast and put the garlic in. But it'll be the closest I ever get to knowing what it was like to actually use one. But using it on soft tissue. And I suppose if I really wanted to get accurate, I would put a World War II era tunic over it and see if I could stab through that. Because 2 of those 6 targets would be covered in clothing. In fact, 4 of the 6 targets would commonly be covered in clothing. Those 6 targets that Fairbairn talks about as being the sweet spots. Only 2 of them wouldn't be. Really, only 1 of them. And I'm sure there's other sweet spots that go beyond this rather brief book that he wrote here. But in all instances, anyways, it is meant primarily, yes, most efficaciously to thrust. That is what it's designed for. But that's not at the expense of also having a sharp edge, which this doesn't have. But it needs to have a sharp edge by his own account. So there's this dichotomous thinking that comes up in weapons and this, historical takes on weaponry and stuff, and just knives in general, that it either cuts or it thrusts, or it either slices or it stabs. And this kind of dichotomous thinking arises out of the military mindset and how it evolved itself. Matt Easton of Scala Gladiatoria recently did a video on the 1890 British military general issue sword. And it was starting to go towards being more thrusty and not as cutty, but it suffers from the fact that it doesn't want to be either. And likewise, the sword that came after, this is the 1908, now is a thruster. Dead straight, balances like around here, easy to aim, and an extremely keen point. In fact, I wonder if I can compare these two. A keen point. Oh, and now I'm embarrassed because I really need to polish that sword. These both need to get cleaned up. Sorry. There we go. Anyways, but very similar points you can see. They are both primarily stabbers or thrusters. But why not sharpen the edge? What, you think having a sharp edge on a thruster means the edge just won't work at all? You need it to work, and it will. You do a draw cut. You would practice doing that. Yeah, it's not going to cut as nicely as a curved one, as easily. It's a different technique, though. You do the curve with your arm. Is it really that complicated? Anyways, I could rant on about it, but I'm not a massive expert on this topic, but I ended up doing some research this morning because I was frustrated by what I could clearly see was BS on some knife forums and stuff. Yeah, I'm going to sharpen it up and use it on my roast tomorrow. Why not? All right, thanks a lot for watching. Click like, subscribe, comment if you think I'm wrong. I'd love to hear it. If there's some other textual support to say the opposite, that you didn't have to sharpen it at all. I know that there was something called an agent spike or an agent knife that was actually just the tine off a pitchfork with a handle taped to it. But that's way more covert ops or something. And yeah, that would work. But given a military usage where it has to be adaptable and be able to do a variety of things, and especially cut arteries cleanly, this had to be able to slice. Okay, thanks for watching.